My mother didn't look at me when she said it. She was arranging flowers on a kitchen table, her back turned, her voice the same flat tone she used to read grocery lists. "We need the room, Mara. Your brother and Sasha are expecting in April. They need the space more than you do." I was standing in the doorway holding a foil container of lasagna I'd made from scratch, because my mother had mentioned she was tired. I'd driven 40 minutes in rush hour traffic to bring it. I set it down on the counter without a word. My father was in the living room. I could hear the game on. He didn't come in. I drove home that night on autopilot, the kind of autopilot that means your hands are on the wheel but your mind is somewhere very still and very cold. I'd been renting a room in their house since I moved back 3 years ago. The plan was temporary. Save money, help them out while my father recovered from his hip surgery, stabilize after my divorce. I paid them $800 a month. I cooked on Sundays. I was quiet. I didn't have parties. I didn't come home late. None of that was the point, apparently. My brother Marcus and his wife needed the room, and I was the thing in the way. I didn't argue. I didn't cry in front of them. I went upstairs, sat on the edge of my bed, the twin bed they'd already started moving toward the wall to make room for measuring tape, and I did the math. They didn't know I was good at math. They thought I worked in computers. That's how my mother described me at church. Mara works in computers. What I actually do is forensic accounting for a boutique firm that contracts with the SEC and private equity groups to investigate financial fraud. I find money people have hidden. I follow trails that are supposed to be invisible. I am very good at it, and I am paid accordingly. Last year, I cleared $480,000. The year before, just over $500,000. I wore the same North Face jacket I'd bought in 2019. I drove a 7-year-old Civic with a cracked dashboard. My parents saw a divorced woman in her early 30s who worked in computers and ate cereal for breakfast because she couldn't afford anything nicer. That was what I wanted them to see, because I knew, the way you know things about the people who raised you, that if they understood what I had, they would find a way to take it. So they thought I was surviving. I let them. That changed the night my mother told me to give my room to Marcus. I found an apartment in 4 days. I packed my things in 10 boxes and a duffel bag, which wasn't hard because I'd never fully unpacked. I left the key on the kitchen counter with no note. My mother texted me 2 days later to ask if I was coming Sunday. I said I was busy. What I didn't mention was that I'd spent those 2 days pulling every financial document I could find through the shared family portal my father had set up years ago when I used to help him manage his accounts. He'd never revoked my access. People rarely change their passwords. It's one of the first things I look for in an investigation. What I found stopped me cold. They weren't just pushing me out to make room for Marcus. They were drowning. My father had taken out a second mortgage 18 months ago. The payments were current barely, but the balloon payment was coming due in 7 months, $62,000. There was no savings to cover it. Their 401k had been cashed out 2 years ago to fund Marcus's restaurant, a farm-to-table concept in a strip mall that had closed after 11 months. The family had never mentioned the restaurant to me while it was failing. They had mentioned it constantly while it was opening, and my father had said at Christmas that Marcus had real vision. Marcus had real vision and my parents had no retirement. But that wasn't the crime. That was just sadness. The crime was buried in an email my father had forwarded to my mother, copied to Marcus, in a thread titled, Mara Tax. I almost missed it because the subject line sounded like something routine. It wasn't. 3 months before they told me to vacate, my father had submitted a refinancing application to a private lender, not a bank, a private hard money lender that charges double-digit interest rates and doesn't ask a lot of questions. On that application, under the section listing household income and assets, he had included my salary, not a rough estimate. The exact figure, 2 lines, tenant dependent, Mara Calloway. Annual income, $487,000. He had listed me as a contributing household dependent with disclosed income to inflate the asset picture and secure a better rate. He didn't ask me. He didn't tell me. He used my financial profile, my professional income from a career they didn't even know I had, to borrow money, and then he asked me to leave. I sat with that for a long time. I made tea I didn't drink. I read the email 4 times. Then I opened my laptop and went to work. The lender was a company called Bridgeland Capital, registered in Delaware, operating in 6 states. They serviced the kind of loans banks declined. High risk, high rate, technically legal. The application my father submitted was fraudulent on 2 counts. He had listed household income from someone who was not a legal co-borrower, and he had signed an attestation stating all information was accurate and complete. That attestation carried personal liability. I wasn't going to do anything with that. Not yet. That was just the ground I was standing on. What I needed was a reason for them to come to me. I called an attorney I'd worked with twice on SEC referral cases. Her name was Dana Reeves, and she had a voice like someone who had never once been surprised by anything a person did for money. I told her what I had. She listened without interrupting. "What do you want?" she asked when I was done. "I want the house," I said. She was quiet for a moment. "Okay, let's talk about how." The house was worth $340,000 based on recent comps in the neighborhood. The outstanding mortgage balance, including the second, was $286,000. There was equity, but not enough equity to matter once you subtracted the balloon payment and the delinquent property tax bill I found buried in the county assessor's records. Another thing they hadn't mentioned, the house was technically theirs for another 7 months. After that, it belonged to Bridgeland Capital unless they found $62,000 they didn't have. Dana helped me structure a shell LLC. We called it Callaway Meridian, which was dull enough to sound like a financial company and personal enough that I would remember it. Then Dana made a phone call to my father. She introduced herself as a representative of Callaway Meridian Asset Group, a private investment firm specializing in distressed residential properties. She told him they'd identified his property through a public foreclosure risk index and were reaching out proactively to owners who might benefit from a pre-foreclosure buyout. She told him the offer was time-sensitive. She told him the firm had cash on hand and could close in 15 days. She told him that because they were buying to hold rather than flip, they were open to flexible post-sale occupancy arrangements. She told him the silent principal behind Callaway Meridian was a private investor who preferred not to be named in preliminary conversations. My father called her back within 2 hours. I monitored the communications through an encrypted forwarding setup Dana had arranged. I listened to my father describe the house with the confidence of someone who hadn't been losing sleep over it for 18 months. He mentioned the kitchen renovation from 2017. He mentioned the neighborhood. He did not mention the balloon payment, the delinquent taxes, or the fact that the basement had flooded twice and been dried out with box fans. He also did not mention me. My mother called my cell phone the next evening. It was the warmest she'd been in months. She asked how the apartment was. She asked if I was eating well. She said my father had some exciting news he wanted to share at Sunday dinner, and it would really mean a lot if I could come. I said I'd be there. I wore a blazer, nothing dramatic, charcoal fitted, the kind of thing I wore when I was closing an investigation and needed a room to take me seriously the moment I walked in. I did my hair. I left my car 2 blocks away and walked. My mother hugged me at the door like nothing had ever been strange between us. Marcus and Sasha were already at the table. Marcus had his phone out. Sasha was due in 3 months and looked exhausted. The baby chair they'd bought was already in the corner of the room. In what had been my room, I noticed. The door half open, the walls painted a soft green that wasn't there 2 weeks ago. They'd repainted before I was fully moved out. My father waited until dessert to bring it up. He poured himself a half glass of wine, leaned back, and announced that he'd been in talks with an investment group interested in purchasing the property and that they'd received a very serious offer. "We're thinking of selling," he said with the relaxed authority of someone who believed he was steering. Strong offer. We'd stay on as renters for 18 months while we figure out the next step. Could free up a lot for Marcus and Sasha to find something too. He looked at Marcus when he said that last part. "That sounds like a big decision," I said. "It's the right time," my father said. "Market's softening. Better to move now than wait for the bank to get involved." He said that last part quietly, and my mother looked at her plate. So they did know about the balloon payment. They'd been carrying it, not mentioning it to me, but carrying it. "Who's the buyer?" I asked. "Investment group." "Private?" I asked. "Investment group." "Private?" "Very professional." He said it like the words themselves were impressive. What's the name? Callaway Meridian. He mispronounced it slightly, Meridian, instead of Meridian, because he'd only ever heard Dana say it over the phone. I nodded slowly and picked up my water glass. 3 days later, Dana called my father to schedule the closing. She told him the principal had reviewed all documentation and was prepared to finalize, but that per the firm's standard protocol, the principal would need to be present in person for the signing. 1 meeting, 1 hour, full transparency on both sides. My father agreed immediately. The closing was set for a Thursday afternoon at Dana's office. Neutral ground, professional setting, no surprises. That was what my father thought. I arrived 45 minutes early. Dana handed me the file. I read through once, found what I needed, and sat in the chair across from the conference room door. They were 7 minutes late. My father came in first, wearing the blazer he wore to my cousin's wedding. My mother followed, clutching her purse with both hands. Marcus came last, looking bored, hands in his pockets, already pulling out his phone before he sat down. Sasha had stayed home. Dana offered water and made small talk about the neighborhood and did everything right. My father leaned across the table to shake the hand of the representative who would, momentarily, introduce him to the silent principal. "He's ready," Dana said, and nodded toward the side door. I walked in. I watched my father's face go through 4 things very quickly: confusion, recognition, recalibration, and then the particular stillness that comes before a person decides which version of themselves to be. He chose dismissive. Mara. His voice was patient in a way that wasn't. "What is this? Are you interning here or something?" "Sit down," I said, not unkindly. The way you say it to someone who is about to need to. He didn't sit. He looked at Dana. "Is she involved in this deal?" "She's the deal," Jana said and opened her briefcase. I pulled a single sheet from the folder and set it on the table facing him. It was a printout of the refinancing application he'd submitted to Bridgeland Capital. I had highlighted one section in yellow. His eyes dropped to it before he could stop himself. My mother leaned over to look. Her face went pale in stages. "You listed my income," I said, "on a loan application, without my knowledge or consent. My name, my salary, my employment information, signed an attestation that everything was accurate and complete." My father straightened. "I listed you as a household contributor. That's standard. I wasn't a co-borrow. I wasn't informed. I didn't consent. And the income figure you listed," I tapped the yellow highlight, "is accurate, which tells me you knew exactly what I earned and never once mentioned it." Marcus had put his phone down. "That application constitutes fraudulent misrepresentation to a private lender," I said. "Under Virginia Code, that's a Class 5 felony. Dana has the citation if you'd like to review it." My father's jaw tightened. "We're family. You can't." "I also found the delinquent property tax," I said. 18 months. I found the second mortgage. I found the restaurant loan Marcus took from your HELOC without a written agreement. I looked at Marcus briefly. He looked at the table. "I do this for a living. I find things. You knew that, actually. You just didn't know what I charged for it." The room held very still. "The balloon payment comes due in 7 months," I said. "You don't have the money." The application to Bridgeline was the last move. It didn't work out. I let that settle. "Callaway Meridian is prepared to purchase the property at fair market value, less outstanding liens and back taxes. The number is $109,000, net to you. It closes in 15 days. You have 18 months of post-sale occupancy at a below-market lease rate. After 18 months, standard month to month." My mother made a small sound that wasn't quite a word. "You'd be handing the house to you," my father said. His voice was different now. Quieter. The performance had come down. "You were handing it to a bank in 7 months," I said, with nothing left over. "This way you walk away with money. You have time to find something. And Marcus and Sasha have a stable place to live while the baby comes." I hadn't planned to say that last part. It came out anyway. Marcus looked up. There was something in his face I hadn't seen in a long time. Not gratitude exactly, more like the expression people make when they realize they've been wrong about something they can't take back. "Why would you do this for us?" my mother asked. Her voice was thin. "I thought about that. I thought about the 40-minute drives with lasagna. I thought about being listed on a loan application as a dependent asset, a line item, a number they'd used and never asked. I thought about a twin bed being pushed against a wall to make room for a measuring tape. I'm not doing it for you, I said. I'm doing it because it's mine and I want it back. My father signed. My mother signed. Marcus signed as witness with hands that weren't steady. They didn't drink champagne. There was no champagne. Dana gathered the documents, and I walked out of the conference room into the gray November afternoon. The parking lot was cold and quiet. I sat in my car for a minute without starting the engine. I didn't feel the way I thought I would. I'd expected something sharper. What I felt instead was something closer to a door clicking shut. Not a slam, just a click. The kind of sound a lock makes when it finally aligns. I started the car and drove home. The closing happened on schedule. $109,000 was transferred to my parents' account the morning of. I watched the transaction process from my own portal and felt nothing complicated about it. They moved out of the house 8 months later, ahead of schedule actually. My mother found a condo 20 minutes away that she said she'd always liked the neighborhood. My father retired quietly. Marcus and Sasha used their portion to put a down payment on a smaller place, 2 towns over, close to Sasha's mother. The baby arrived in April. A girl. I got a photo texted to me. I sent a gift. I didn't go to the hospital. I had the property professionally cleaned, the deferred maintenance addressed, and the basement waterproofed. I repainted 2 rooms. I left one room exactly as they'd left it, the one that had been mine, then painted green for a nursery that never arrived, the crib still assembled in the corner like a question someone forgot to answer. I turned it into an office. I work from there now, 3 days a week, at a desk position next to the window that looks out over the yard my grandmother planted before I was born. The property files are on the shelf. The Callaway Meridian LLC is still active in case I need it again. My mother calls on Sundays sometimes. I answer about half the time. She talks about the condo and what she's watching and whether I'm eating enough. She doesn't mention the house. I don't either. My father hasn't called. There are people who will tell you that what I did was cold, that I should have sat down with them and been direct, offered help without leverage, handled it like a family. Those people are not wrong, exactly. They've just never stood in a doorway holding something warm they made for someone who didn't look up from the flowers they were arranging. I know what I am. I find the rot in the ledger. I cut it out. I am surgical and I am precise. And the only thing I've ever wanted from the people who raised me was to be seen. They saw a line on an application. I bought the house. I still think about the lasagna. Not the house, not the closing documents, not the moment my father's face went gray when he read his own application back to himself. I think about the foil container I carried 40 minutes through rush hour traffic because my mother said she was tired. I set it on their counter and they never once asked how I was doing. That's the part people miss when they hear a story like this. They want to talk about the fraud, the shell company, the deed transfer. But the real thing, the thing that took years to understand, is that the harm wasn't the loan application. The harm was being invisible for so long that I'd stopped expecting to be seen at all. What I know now is that actions accumulate, not in some mystical way, not karma, in the way people use that word loosely, but in the plain, measurable way that choices compound over time. My father made a choice every year since I was a child, to take what I offered and give nothing back in return. That choice didn't destroy him in a single moment. It built a pattern. And patterns, eventually, become outcomes. He spent decades treating generosity like a resource to extract, and he ended up with nothing to extract from. Not the house, not the relationship, not the goodwill of a daughter who had spent years quietly showing up. I spent a long time being ashamed of the fact that I hid what I had. I wore old clothes. I drove a car with a cracked dashboard. I let them believe I was barely getting by, and for years I told myself it was strategic, which it was, but underneath that, I think I also just wanted to be loved for something other than my usefulness. I wanted them to look up from the flowers they were arranging. They never did. What saved me wasn't anger. Anger would have made me sloppy. What saved me was the discipline I'd built over years of work that nobody in that house ever asked about. The ability to look at a problem without flinching. to follow a trail to its end, to build a case from facts instead of feelings. That's not something you're born with. I built it on purpose, one late night at a time, in a career my mother described to her church friends as working in computers. The three things that matter in a situation like mine aren't dramatic. They're quiet. They're doing the right thing even when no one is watching, paying your own way, not taking what isn't yours, not lying on an application because you're desperate and think no one will check. They're knowing enough to understand your own situation clearly, without delusion or self-pity. And they're the willingness to keep going anyway, through a divorce, through a twin bed being pushed against a wall, through a family that looked at you and saw a line item. Mara didn't inherit the house. She earned it, and not just financially. She earned the right to it, the slow way, by being the person in that family who told the truth, did the work, and showed up with lasagna anyway. I turned my old room into an office. I work near the window. My grandmother planted the yard before I was born, and the hydrangeas come back every spring without anyone tending to them. Some things survive neglect. Some things don't. I know which one I chose to be.